The groom's chair stood empty. 200 guests turned to stare. And Yovienne? She was already at the altar, already standing in $12,000 worth of ivory silk, already holding white roses with trembling hands. The string quartet kept playing. Pachelbel's Canon, the same song she and Elliot had chosen together 3 months ago, laughing over the florist's catalogue with their fingers intertwined. Now it sounded like a funeral march. The man beside her leaned close. Not Elliot. Someone else entirely. Someone taller. Someone whose presence commanded the space around him like gravity commands planets. His voice was barely a breath against her ear. "Stay calm. You're not alone up here. I've got you." 200 pairs of eyes watched her. Society journalists with cameras raised. Her mother in the front row, confusion replacing joy. Her daughter somewhere in the crowd, clutching a basket of rose petals, waiting for a fairy tale that was fracturing in real time. Have you ever had the ground disappear beneath your feet? That moment when everything you believed, everything you built your future on, turned out to be nothing but smoke and mirrors? Yovienne knew that feeling. She was drowning in it. She was abandoned, humiliated, left standing in ivory silk with 200 witnesses to her complete and total heartbreak. But what her runaway groom didn't know, what nobody in that church could have possibly guessed, was that the man standing beside her at that altar, he had been carrying a secret about Yovienne for 6 years, a secret that would change everything, not just for Yovienne, but for her daughter, for the groom who ran, for everyone who thought they understood what love looked like. And before this day was over, that secret would surface, slowly at first, then all at once, like a fire that starts in one corner and consumes everything before anyone realizes how far it has spread. If you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted completely, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button now, because what happens next, you won't see it coming. But to understand how Yovienne ended up at that altar, we need to go back to the beginning, to the morning she thought would be the happiest day of her life. 6 hours earlier, the world looked completely different. Golden morning light poured through the windows of the bridal suite at Thornwood Estate. The kind of light that makes everything look soft, warm and blessed. The kind photographers spend entire careers chasing. Yovienne stood in front of a floor-length mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. The dress was a masterpiece, ivory silk that cascaded like water down her frame, hugging every curve before flowing into a modest train. Hand-stitched lace climbed from the bodice to her collarbone. 3 months of fittings, $12,000, worth every single penny. Her auburn hair was swept into an elegant updo, loose tendrils framing her face. The makeup artist had worked miracles. She looked radiant. She looked like a woman who had finally, after years of struggle and sacrifice, arrived at the life she deserved. "Hold still, sweetheart." Her mother's voice was thick with emotion as she fastened the final button at the small of Yovienne's back. "Your grandmother wore buttons just like these. 63 years of marriage. That's the kind of love I want for you." The room smelled like lavender sachets and expensive perfume. Champagne sat untouched on the vanity. Bridesmaids moved around her like worker bees, adjusting her veil, smoothing invisible wrinkles, checking their own reflections. Everything was perfect. And then the door burst open. "Mummy!" A tiny tornado in a white flower girl dress came running across the suite. Meadow, 5 years old, with her mother's auburn curls and a smile that could dissolve any tension in any room. She launched herself at Yovienne's legs, nearly toppling the bride entirely. "Careful, baby," Yovienne laughed, scooping her daughter into her arms. The weight of her child grounded her, reminded her exactly why today mattered so much. "Mummy, you look like a princess." Meadow's eyes went wide with wonder. "A real one, like in the movies." "You think Daddy Elliot will like it?" Meadow nodded with the absolute certainty only 5-year-olds possess. "He said he's going to cry happy tears when he sees you. He promised." Elliot had been in their lives for 2 years. He had entered slowly, carefully, earning Meadow's trust before asking for Yovienne's heart. He'd proposed under the stars at a beach resort 11 months ago, had insisted on signing Meadow's birth certificate as her legal guardian, had promised to be the father her daughter deserved. Yovienne pressed a kiss to Meadow's forehead and set her down gently. Through the window, she could see guests arriving in the courtyard below. Women in elegant dresses, men adjusting their ties, the string quartet warming up beside the rose-covered archway. For one perfect moment, she believed she deserved all of it. The dress, the man, the fairy tale ending she had worked so hard to reach. She had no idea that 3 miles away, Elliot was climbing into his car with a single bag, alone, engine running, going somewhere she would never find him. Some mornings begin with hope so bright you can taste it. The cruel ones, those are the mornings when hope becomes the knife that cuts deepest. The door opened again 40 minutes later. This time, no one was smiling. Natasha, her maid of honor and closest friend since college, stood in the doorway. Her face had lost every drop of color. She looked like someone had reached inside her chest and removed something essential. Yovienne. Her voice cracked on the second syllable. "Can I talk to you? Alone?" The champagne laughter died instantly. Bridesmaids exchanged nervous glances. Yovienne's mother stopped adjusting the veil, hands frozen mid-air. "Whatever it is, just say it." Yovienne kept her voice light, refusing to let the cold dread creeping up her spine take hold. "We need to start lining up in 15 minutes. Natasha's lower lip trembled. "Maybe you should sit down first." "Natasha, Elliot's gone." 2 words, just 2 words, and the entire world stopped spinning. "What do you mean, gone?" Yovienne heard her own voice from somewhere far away. "Gone where? Did something happen? Is he hurt?" Natasha shook her head. Tears were streaming down her face now, ruining her carefully applied makeup. "His car. Marcus saw it on the interstate heading south 40 minutes ago. He was alone." "That's impossible." The bouquet slipped from Yovienne's fingers. White roses scattered across the hardwood floor. "We talked last night. He said he couldn't wait to see me walk down that aisle. He said..." His phone goes straight to voicemail. Marcus finally broke down and told us everything. Natasha's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Elliot called him at 5 this morning. Said he couldn't go through with it. Said he was sorry. Then he smashed his phone so no one could reach him." The room began to tilt. Yovienne reached for the vanity to steady herself. Her reflection stared back at her. A beautiful stranger in a $12,000 dress that suddenly felt like a costume. A lie she'd been wearing while the truth waited just outside the door. Her breath left her body slowly, like air releasing from a punctured balloon. Her spine curved. Her shoulders collapsed inward. She watched herself crumbling in real time and couldn't do a single thing to stop it. "The guests." The words came out hollow. "There are 200 people out there." "I know. The caterers, the photographer, the string quartet." "I know, honey." "My daughter." Yovienne's voice broke completely on the word. "Meadow went downstairs 20 minutes ago. She's out there right now practicing throwing her flower petals, practicing for a daddy who isn't coming." Nobody had an answer for that. Through the window, perfectly arranged white chairs, the rose-covered archway, guests checking their programs, fanning themselves in the late morning heat, all of them waiting for a wedding that would never happen. "What do I do?" Yovienne looked at the women surrounding her. "Someone tell me what I'm supposed to do right now." Silence. Her mother cried softly in the corner. Bridesmaids studied their feet. Natasha stood helpless, devastated by the news she'd been forced to deliver. 200 witnesses to her humiliation. A daughter who would ask where Daddy went. A future that had evaporated in the time it took one coward to start his engine and drive away. Yovienne straightened her spine, lifted her chin, forced her legs to move toward the door. If she was going to fall apart, she would do it somewhere private. She would not give these walls the satisfaction of witnessing her break. She made it 3 steps into the corridor before she saw him. He stood at the end of the hallway, like he had always been there. Tall, broad shoulders filling a charcoal suit that had clearly been made for his exact measurements. Dark hair swept back from a face that belonged in boardrooms and on magazine covers simultaneously. He stood with his hands clasped loosely behind him, perfectly still, like a man who had never once been rattled by anything the world threw at him. Dominic Varn, Jovien's employer for the past 3 years. Founder and CEO of Varn Industries, one of the most powerful tech investment firms in New York. A man whose name appeared on hospital wings and university buildings. A man whose photograph appeared in Forbes alongside words like visionary and relentless. He had been invited to this wedding because Elliot's firm held a minor partnership with one of Varn Industries' subsidiaries. A courtesy invitation, the kind sent out of professional obligation rather than genuine expectation of attendance. Yet here he stood. Miss Thorne. His voice was low and steady. No panic, no pity, just calm, unshakable authority. Elliot's car was spotted heading south on Interstate 95 approximately 40 minutes ago. His phone has been destroyed. He isn't coming back. Jovien flinched. Hearing it from Natasha had been devastating. Hearing it from this man, stated so plainly and clinically, made it permanent in a way she hadn't been ready for. How do you know that? I make it my business to know things. He took a measured step forward. You have approximately 10 minutes before the wedding coordinator starts looking for you. In that window, you have 2 choices. She stared at him. Choices. Option 1. You walk out there and announce to 200 guests, including 3 society journalists, that your groom has abandoned you. The story reaches social media within the hour. Your professional reputation suffers. Your daughter grows up seeing photographs from today captioned with words like jilted and abandoned. Every word landed like a blade. He wasn't being cruel. He was simply telling the truth. And somehow, that made it infinitely worse. Option 2. He paused. You walk down that aisle anyway, with me standing at the end of it. Jovien's breath stopped entirely. You can't be serious. I don't make jokes, Miss Thorne. Not about things that matter. He held her gaze without flinching. The guests see a bride and a groom. The ceremony proceeds. Your daughter gets her moment. You walk away from today with your dignity intact instead of becoming tomorrow's headline. We would be legally married. Paperwork can be addressed later. What matters in the next 10 minutes is protecting you and your daughter from a story neither of you deserves. She didn't know this man. Not really. 3 years of professional distance, formal meetings, performance reviews conducted through his executive assistant. She didn't know why he was offering this. She didn't know what it cost him. She didn't know what he wanted in return. But she knew what waited for her if she walked out there alone. Why? She whispered. Why would you do this? Something moved behind his eyes. Something old and patient and carefully contained. Do you trust me? The question was unreasonable. She had no grounds for trust, no history with him beyond professional courtesy. But standing there with her world in pieces around her feet, Jovien made the decision that would change every single thing that came after. Yes. He extended his hand. Strong fingers, steady grip. Then let's go. She placed her hand in his, and they walked toward the altar together. 94 seconds. That's how long it takes to walk from the bridal suite corridor to the altar at Thornwood Estate. Jovien knew because she had timed it during rehearsal 3 days ago, laughing as Elliot pretended to faint at the sight of her in her dress. Now she counted every step, not to remember this moment, but because counting was the only thing keeping her legs moving forward. 1, 2, 3. Dominic walked beside her to the altar entrance where her father waited, arm extended, confusion etched across every line of his weathered face. Jovien. Her father's voice dropped low. Where is Elliot? Who is this man? She couldn't find the words. Her father looked at Dominic. Dominic met his gaze directly, steadily, without explanation or apology. Just a single, almost imperceptible nod. A silent communication between 2 men. A promise made without language. Her father held it for a long moment. Then he looked back at his daughter. Read something in her eyes that made him straighten. Trust me, Daddy, she whispered. Please. He covered her hand with his. Always. The doors swung open. Sunlight flooded the corridor. The string quartet launched into the processional. 200 faces turned toward her simultaneously, smiles ready, cameras raised. 23, 24, 25. The gasps started within seconds, not quiet murmurs. Audible, rippling confusion spreading row by row through the assembled guests. Because standing at that altar, waiting with composed certainty, was not Elliot Whitmore. It was Dominic Varn, and the guests who recognized him, which was most of them, understood immediately that something significant had shifted. Phones emerged despite the wedding coordinator's no photography policy. Whispered names traveled from row to row. Is that Dominic Varn? Why is he standing at the altar? Where is Elliot? 61, 62, 63. Minister Davies stood rigidly beside Dominic, his Bible clutched to his chest, his expression cycling between bewilderment and professional obligation. Natasha had reached him first, appearing from nowhere with the focused efficiency of someone determined to hold a situation together through sheer force of will. Last-minute change, she had whispered to him. Family emergency. The ceremony proceeds. Keep smiling. 87, 88, 89. Yovienne reached the altar. Her father placed her hand in Dominic's. Warm fingers closed around hers with a steadiness that kept her upright. Take care of her. Her father's voice carried both love and warning in equal measure. With everything I have, Dominic replied. 94. She was here, standing before 200 witnesses about to marry her employer, the man she had worked beside for 3 years without ever truly knowing him. The string quartet faded into silence. The guests settled, still buzzing with confusion but too well-mannered to interrupt. Minister Davies cleared his throat. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. The ceremony had begun. Mummy? The small voice cut through the minister's opening words like a pin through silk. Meadow stood at the edge of the altar garden path, her flower basket clutched in both hands, petals forgotten. Her auburn curls caught the late morning sunlight. Her bottom lip trembled with the specific vulnerability of a child who senses that the adults around her are managing something large and frightening. Mommy, where's Daddy Elliot? 200 guests fell completely silent. Yovienne felt her composure begin to fracture. The tears she had been holding back since the bridal suite pressed hard against the dam she'd built. Before she could speak, Dominic moved. He released her hand and knelt down on one knee. Right there, on the garden stone, in front of everyone, his expensive suit pressed against the path. His eyes came level with Meadow's, and something in his expression shifted completely. The boardroom authority dissolved. What replaced it was something quieter, gentler, like a door opening onto a room that had been locked for a very long time. Hey there. His voice was soft, intended only for her. You must be Meadow. Your mom has a photograph of you on her desk at work. I recognized you immediately. Meadow blinked, surprised out of her worry. You know my mummy? I do. My name is Dominic. I work with her. He held her gaze steadily. Daddy Elliot had to go away unexpectedly today, but your mummy still needs someone to stand beside her, so I'm here to help. Is that all right with you? Meadow studied him with the fierce, unfiltered assessment that only children are capable of. Her eyes moved from his face to her mother's and back again, reading, deciding. Are you going to be nice to her? She demanded. I'm going to be very nice to her. I promise. Pinky promise? Dominic extended his little finger without hesitation. Meadow hooked hers around it with grave solemnity, the way children do when they understand that some promises carry real weight. Then she picked up her basket, squared her small shoulders, and began scattering petals down the aisle with absolute determination. Permission granted. Dominic rose, returned to Jovienne's side, and took her hand again. She looked at him, really looked, and saw something behind his eyes that she couldn't name yet. Something that looked like it had been waiting there for a very long time. The vows passed in a blur. Jovienne heard herself speaking, words about love and honor and cherishing, promises she had written for another man. now offered into the open air in front of witnesses who had no idea what they were actually watching. Each word felt both hollow and strangely significant, like reciting lines that had accidentally become true. When Minister Davies turned to Dominic, there was a pause. 1 beat. 2. Then Dominic spoke, and his voice was completely steady. I vow to stand beside you in moments of joy and in moments of sorrow, to be your shelter when the world becomes too heavy, to protect what matters most to you, whether you ask me to or not. His eyes remained fixed on her face throughout. I vow to keep every promise I make, starting with the ones I've already made today. The rings were a complication no one had anticipated. Elliot's ring was gone, carried south on Interstate 95, along with every other promise he'd made. Dominic reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and removed a ring from his own hand. A solid gold band he wore on his right hand, simple and unadorned. An inheritance from his father that he had worn since his 20s. It isn't what it should be, he murmured. But it's real. He slid it onto her finger. Too large by half a size. She closed her hand slightly to keep it in place. For his ring, Natasha stepped forward before anyone could register the problem. She unclasped a chain from around her neck, one she always wore, her own father's wedding band hanging from it. She pressed it into Jovienne's palm without a word. Her eyes said everything. Jovienne slid it onto Dominic's finger. A slightly imperfect fit, but it held. You may now kiss the bride. Minister Davies delivered the words with barely concealed relief. Dominic turned to her, stepped close. His hand rose to cup her cheek, with a tenderness that felt completely at odds with the transaction this marriage was supposed to be. His breath was warm against her lips. Just stay with me, he whispered, and then he pressed his lips to her forehead, soft, unhurried, like a promise being sealed rather than a performance being delivered. The guests erupted. Jovienne Thorne became Mrs. Dominic Varn. 4 hours and 17 minutes. That was how long Jovienne spent as Mrs. Dominic Varney before the last guest disappeared into the evening and Thornwood Estate fell quiet. 4 hours of dancing, smiling, accepting congratulations for a marriage constructed from desperation, and an act of extraordinary generosity from a man she was only beginning to understand. 4 hours of playing a role while somewhere on an interstate highway, the man she had actually planned to marry put more miles between himself and everything he had promised. Dominic was extraordinary at this. His hand never left the appropriate places. His smile engaged without overreaching. He laughed at the best man's improvised speech, which managed to be charming despite clearly having been written for a different groom entirely. He accepted congratulations with the ease of a man who understood exactly what was required of him in any given room. Her mother wept with happiness, believing completely. Her father shook Dominic's hand with a grip that said everything words couldn't. The society journalists got their photographs. Captions would read, "Surprise guest becomes surprise groom by morning." The narrative was intact. Jovienne's dignity was intact. But it was the final dance that undid something carefully constructed inside her chest. The band played a slow waltz as the last guests gathered their belongings. Meadow, thoroughly exhausted from a day that had asked far too much of a 5-year-old, had fallen asleep somewhere between the cake cutting and the bouquet toss. She was currently draped across Dominic's shoulder, one small fist clutching his lapel, her breathing deep and even. He held her like she was made of something irreplaceable. "She looks like you," he said quietly. Jovienne watched her daughter's sleeping face. She has her own opinions about everything, gets that honestly. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I remember your opinions, the salary negotiation, 3 years ago. You walked into my office asking for 30% above the posted range. You gave me 40. Yes. Why?" He shifted Meadow's weight slightly, meeting Jovienne's eyes over her daughter's auburn curls. "Because you were worth 50. I gave you 40, hoping you wouldn't realize the gap and go somewhere that would pay what you actually deserved." The music continued. The room was nearly empty now. "Why did you do all of this today?" she asked, quietly. The question she'd been carrying since the corridor. The real reason, not the explanation you gave me about dignity and narratives. Dominic's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. His gaze moved somewhere past her shoulder, somewhere she couldn't follow. "Some answers require the right moment," he said finally. "That isn't an answer." "No." He looked back at her. "It isn't." Two strangers playing husband and wife, a child asleep between them, and a question he refused to answer hanging in the space between every word he spoke. Why would a man like Dominic Varn do any of this? Drop your theory in the comments right now, because I want to know what you think is really happening here. The wedding was over, the guests were gone, and Jovienne was left holding a marriage she hadn't planned, a mystery she couldn't solve, and a daughter who had fallen asleep trusting a stranger completely. The real storm was just beginning. 3 days of silence. 3 days of explaining to Meadow, in the careful language mothers use when the truth is too jagged for small ears, that Daddy Elliot had needed to go away for a while. 3 days of fielding calls from relatives who had read the society pages and were full of questions Jovienne couldn't answer honestly. 3 days of existing in a marriage that was real on paper and surreal in practice, while Dominic handled legal formalities from across the city and left her alone to process everything she'd survived. Sunday night, she thought she'd finally started to breathe again. Then the knock came. 9 o'clock. Meadow was already asleep. Jovienne had been sitting with a book she hadn't actually been reading when the sound came at her front door. She assumed Natasha, maybe her mother, someone checking on her with food and concern. She opened the door and found Elliot. He looked like the inside of a bad decision, unshaven, eyes red and swollen, his usually polished appearance reduced to wrinkled clothes and the particular hollowness of a man who hadn't slept in days. He smelled like whiskey and something that might have been regret if regret had a scent. "Joe." His voice cracked on the single syllable. "Please, just let me say what I came to say." Every reasonable thought she possessed told her to close the door, to call someone, to do absolutely anything except step aside. She stepped aside. He entered her apartment and immediately began pacing, back and forth across her living room like a man trying to outrun the walls closing in on him. "Someone called me," he said. "The morning of the wedding. Before sunrise. Blocked number." "What?" "They knew things." He stopped pacing, turned to face her. "Things about you, about before we met." "Elliot." "I know about the party." His voice changed on those words, went flat and accusatory. "Stanford, 6 years ago, the Sigma House, the night you got pregnant." The floor disappeared beneath her. That night, the one she had packed away so carefully, the memory she had sealed and buried and refused to examine. Somehow, a stranger on a blocked call had known about it well enough to use it as a weapon on her wedding morning. "How does anyone know about that?" She whispered. "I don't know who called." Elliot's voice was rising now, cracking at the edges. "But they knew enough. They told me you'd been lying, that Meadow's father was someone you'd been hiding, that the whole foundation of what we built together was constructed on something you never told me. You could have asked me." The fury came quietly at first, then gathered force. "You had my number. You had 3 years of trust between us. You could have picked up that phone and called me instead of running." I panicked. "You abandoned me." The words came out with the full weight of what that morning had cost her. At the altar, in front of everyone who matters to me, in front of my daughter, because an anonymous caller told you something and you didn't have enough faith in me to ask for my side. Elliot looked at the floor. "She has a father out there." His voice came out quieter now, and somehow that made it more dangerous. "Someone you've never told her about. Someone you've never told me about. That's not a small thing, Joe. I made choices that were mine to make." "And Meadow?" He looked up. Were those choices hers too? The silence that followed was its own kind of violence. He moved toward the door, then stopped. When he turned back, something had shifted in his expression. The grief had hardened into something calculated and cold. "My name is on her birth certificate," he said. "I signed that as her legal guardian. That gives me standing." Ice formed in Jovienne's stomach. "I want to know who her biological father is," Elliot continued. And until I get that answer, I'm keeping my options open regarding my legal rights to that child. The door closed behind him. Jovienne stood in her empty living room, her daughter asleep down the hall, and understood that the worst of this was only just beginning. Elliot's warning lived in Jovienne's chest for 3 days like a splinter, working its way deeper. Wednesday morning, Natasha sat across from her at the kitchen table, both of them nursing coffee that had gone cold. "He can't just take her," Jovienne said. "He has no biological connection to Meadow. His signature is on her birth certificate." Natasha's voice was careful, measured, the tone of someone delivering difficult information to someone they love. "That establishes presumed legal paternity in this state. He'd have standing to petition for custody rights, particularly given that he's acted as her father for 2 years. 2 years. It matters legally. Parent-teacher meetings, medical appointments, being named as guardian on school forms. That's a documented relationship a judge would take seriously." Jovienne stared at her coffee. "So what do I do?" "You establish who Meadow's biological father actually is. You get documentation. You remove the legal ambiguity before Elliot can use it against you. Find the stranger from a balcony 6 years ago, a man whose face she had never seen, whose name she had never known, who had vanished before the lights came back on. Impossible. There's something else." Natasha set down her mug. "The way Elliot looked when he left your apartment Sunday night, I've known him long enough to recognize the difference between someone who's hurt and someone who's making plans. That was plans, Joe." Before Jovienne could respond, her doorbell rang. Dominic stood on her doorstep, suit jacket over a shirt, no tie, which was the most casual she had ever seen him. He looked like a man who had been awake for most of the night, working through problems on her behalf. "Elliot made his position clear Sunday," he said, stepping inside without waiting to be invited. "We need to get ahead of this. How much do you know?" "Enough." He sat at her kitchen table, opposite the chair Natasha had just vacated. "Tell me everything," he said. "Every word." She did. When she finished, Dominic was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the way it always was when he was constructing something carefully in his mind. "There's something I need to tell you," he said finally. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." He paused. "You might know Meadow's father better than you realize." Jovienne stared at him. "What does that mean?" He looked at her steadily. "It means I need you to trust me one more time." That night, sleep refused to come. Meadow was peaceful down the hall, her stuffed elephant tucked under one arm, her breathing the deep and even rhythm of a child with a clean conscience. Dominic had left after 2 hours of careful conversation that had raised more questions than it answered. His final words sat in the air of her apartment like smoke after a fire. "You might know Meadow's father better than you realize." 3 in the morning found Jovienne sitting in the dark of her living room, allowing the memory she had spent 6 years refusing to examine to finally surface. Stanford, senior year, April. She had been quietly falling apart that spring. Thesis revisions that never seemed finished. Graduate school applications that represented her parents' dreams more than her own. The constant pressure of being the first in her family to reach this level, the weight of that responsibility sitting on her chest every morning she opened her eyes. The Sigma House party was supposed to be one night of release. A few hours of not being responsible or excellent or perfectly on track. She had let herself go further than intended, shot after shot with people whose names she barely knew, dancing until the room tilted pleasantly, laughing at things that weren't particularly funny because laughing felt like breathing after months of holding her breath. And then the lights went out. The entire neighborhood lost power at once. Some failure at a nearby substation. But in the Sigma House, the sudden darkness turned a party into chaos. Screaming, bodies colliding in the dark, the smell of spilled drinks and panic. Jovienne pushed through the nearest door and found herself outside. The balcony was quiet in the way that only outdoor spaces can be quiet. Open air. A sky full of stars over the California hills. She gripped the railing and breathed in and out until the spinning slowed. "Rough night?" The voice came from somewhere to her left, deep, warm. a voice that sounded like it belonged to someone who had never once been uncertain about where he stood. She should have been startled, should have stepped back toward the door. Instead, something about his presence felt like solid ground in a room that had been tilting all evening. "The worst," she admitted. "I came here to forget my problems and only managed to add more." He laughed, low and genuine, the kind of laugh that doesn't perform itself. He moved closer. She still couldn't see him. Only the outline of him in the darkness. Tall, broad shoulders, clothes that didn't quite belong at this kind of party. "What are you running from?" he asked. "Everything," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. "My parents' expectations, my own, the version of myself I've been performing for the last 4 years. Then stop performing. It isn't that simple." No. He was close enough now that she caught his scent. Cedar, bourbon, something underneath both that she couldn't name, but that her memory would hold on to for years. But for one night, you could just be you, whoever that is when no one's watching. The darkness made honesty easy. She told him things she had never said out loud. He listened without interrupting, without offering solutions, without checking his phone. He talked too, eventually, about expectations he carried that didn't fit, about a life that looked right from the outside and felt like borrowed clothing. They talked for hours, and then they were kissing. She didn't entirely know how it happened, only that it felt inevitable in the specific way that reckless choices always feel inevitable in the moment before you make them. His hands were careful, deliberate, like someone who understood that what they were doing mattered. Afterward, he held her. His thumb traced slow patterns across her knuckles back and forth, like he was memorizing the geography of her hand. Then he pressed his lips to her forehead. "I'll find you," he said. "When the sun comes up, I swear I'll find you." 20 minutes later, the lights came back on. She turned to look at him for the first time, to see the face that belonged to the voice she would carry in her memory for years. The balcony was empty. The door was still moving on its hinges. Dark hair disappearing into the crowd below was all she caught before he was gone. She searched for weeks, asked everyone she could find. No one remembered a tall man in expensive clothes on the balcony that night. 8 weeks later, she discovered she was pregnant. She made her choice. Kept the baby, buried the memory, built a life around the daughter who arrived from that night, fierce and auburn-haired and full of absolute certainty about everything. Until tonight, when the memory refused to stay buried any longer. Dawn came without sleep. Jovienne sat motionless in her living room as grey light replaced darkness outside her windows. The coffee she had made at 4 in the morning sat cold and untouched beside her. The memory was fully awake now. 6 years of deliberate suppression undone in a single sleepless night. And with it came the connections, the way the stranger had traced patterns across her knuckles. Slow and deliberate, like someone memorizing something they intended to keep. She had felt it so clearly in the darkness that she could still feel it now, years later, if she closed her eyes. During the final dance at the reception, Dominic's thumb had moved across the back of her hand in the same pattern. She had noticed it then without understanding why it felt familiar. She understood now. The forehead kiss. The stranger on the balcony had pressed his mouth to her forehead before he disappeared. Not her lips. Her forehead, like a seal on a letter, like a promise being made permanent. Dominic had done the same thing at the altar in front of 200 people when the minister said he could kiss the bride. He had chosen her forehead. She had thought it was restraint, propriety, professional distance maintained even in an intimate moment. What if it was something else entirely? The scent, cedar and bourbon, and something warm underneath. She had noticed it in the corridor when Dominic first stepped toward her on the wedding morning, had registered it somewhere below conscious thought as familiar without being able to place it. She was placing it now. His height, his voice at its quietest, stripped of boardroom authority, the way he had looked at Meadow from the first moment, like someone seeing something they had wondered about for a long time. You might know Meadow's father better than you realize. Jovienne sat forward in her chair. He knew, or suspected, He had known, or suspected for long enough, that he had chosen his words carefully on Wednesday evening, watching her face while he said them. The question was how, and the question underneath that was whether the impossible thing she was beginning to believe could actually be true. Dominic Vaughan, Yale, Goldman Sachs, Vaughan Industries, a biography she could recite from memory because she had read it in every profile written about him during the years she had worked at his company. His Wikipedia page listed every milestone, every achievement, every board position. It did not explain where he had been during the 12 months between Yale graduation and his Goldman Sachs start date, a gap she had never thought to question before tonight. She reached for her laptop. If Dominic Vaughan had been at Stanford that night, there would be a record somewhere, a photograph, an event log, something, and if she found it, everything was about to change. She began to search. Thursday morning, Jovienne called in sick for the first time in 4 years. She kept Meadow home from preschool too, made pancakes, watched cartoons, tried to be present in her body while her mind was already 3 windows deep into a search she couldn't stop. When Meadow went down for her afternoon nap, Jovienne opened her personal laptop and started pulling threads. Stanford Alumni Database. She searched for Dominic Vaughan first, expecting nothing, finding exactly that. His degree was from Yale. No Stanford affiliation listed anywhere in the official records. She moved to his professional biography, the timeline she knew from years of working in his orbit. Yale graduation, then a gap, then Goldman Sachs. The gap had never registered as significant before. Now it was the only thing she could see. 12 months. Unaccounted for, not mentioned in any profile or interview she could find. She went deeper. Technology forums from 6 years ago, industry newsletters, event archives, looking for any mention of his name in connection with Stanford or the Bay Area during that specific window. 2.5 hours in, she found it. Stanford Daily Archives, an April edition from 6 years ago, a photograph from the Future Innovators panel, a tech industry mixer, hosted in the Whitmore Conference Center, the building immediately adjacent to the Sigma House. Same campus block, same weekend, April 17th. The photograph showed a crowded networking event, professionals and students filling a ballroom beneath a banner reading Future Innovators Panel. In the far corner, partially behind a group of people, stood a tall figure, broad shoulders, dark hair. Weight shifted to the left, hands clasped behind his back. She knew that posture. Had seen it in every board meeting, every company presentation, every time Dominic stood at a window thinking through something he wasn't ready to say aloud. The face was turned away, too blurry to confirm, but the stance was unmistakable. Her hands were shaking. She sat back and stared at the screen. It wasn't proof. A blurry figure in a crowded photograph wasn't proof of anything. She needed him to tell her directly. Her phone buzzed. A text from Dominic. I think we need to talk, not about Elliot, about something older than that. Come to my office tomorrow morning if you're willing. I'll explain everything I should have explained a long time ago. Jovienne read it twice. He was ready to tell her. Whatever he knew, whatever he had been carrying, he had decided the time for careful distance was over. She typed back, I'll be there at 9. Then she closed her laptop, went and sat beside her sleeping daughter, and held Meadow's small hand while she tried to prepare herself for what she was about to learn. Friday morning, 9 o'clock exactly. The executive floor of Vaughan Industries occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan. Jovienne had been up here for company presentations twice in 3 years, always surrounded by colleagues, always focused on the work. The space had felt impressive and impersonal on both occasions. Today it felt entirely different. Mr. Vaughan is expecting you, the receptionist said before Jovienne could speak. Go right in. His office door was open. Dominic stood at the windows when she entered, his back to the door, looking out over the city. He turned when he heard her footsteps. He wasn't wearing his jacket. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow. He looked like a man who had been awake since before sunrise, working up to something difficult. Close the door, he said. She did. The silence that followed lasted long enough to feel intentional, like he was choosing the exact right point of entry into a conversation he had rehearsed and discarded multiple versions of. 6 years ago, he said finally. April. I was in the Bay Area for a speaking engagement. Yovien's breath caught. She stayed very still. The Future Innovators panel at Stanford. I was 26, the youngest person on the panel by about 15 years, which I found more exhausting than flattering. He turned back to the window. I left the event early, couldn't face another hour of networking conversations that were really just people measuring themselves against each other. You went upstairs, Jovien said quietly. He turned to look at her. There was a party, music loud enough to hear from the stairwell. I thought about leaving, went looking for somewhere quiet instead. He paused. I found a balcony. The room felt very small suddenly. The city spread out behind him, massive and indifferent, and Jovien stood in the middle of his office, feeling the ground tilt beneath her feet for the second time in 1 week. The power went out, she said. Yes. And there was a woman already there. Yes. His voice was lower now. She was holding the railing like it was the only solid thing available. She looked like someone who had been holding everything together for so long that the effort had become invisible even to herself. Jovien's throat tightened. We talked for hours. He crossed the room slowly, stopping a few feet from her. I don't think I have ever been that honest with a stranger in my life. She made it easy somehow. The darkness helped. And when the lights came back on, I panicked. You left. I left. He said it like the admission cost him something significant. I was 26 and I had just done something completely outside every boundary I had set for myself, with a woman whose last name I didn't know, and I handled it the way I handled most things at 26, badly. You promised to find me. And I tried. He ran a hand through his hair. The first uncontrolled gesture she had ever seen from him. I went back the next morning. The party was long over. I asked everyone I could find. No one knew who I was describing. I hired someone to help me search for the next 8 months. Jovien stared at him. 8 months. I found you 18 months later. New York. Marketing career. A daughter who was 3 months old in the first photograph my investigators sent me. His jaw tightened. I did the math immediately. But you didn't come to me. No. He met her eyes fully. I didn't know how. I didn't know if it was even true. I didn't know if showing up and saying what I suspected would help you, or devastate you, or both. He exhaled slowly. So I created a professional opportunity instead. I told myself I was giving you a choice, proximity without pressure, a chance for us to exist in the same space while I figured out the right way to approach what I suspected. For 3 years. For 3 years. He reached out and took her hand carefully, his thumb moving across her knuckles in that slow, familiar pattern. I'm sorry it took this long. I'm sorry about all of it. But I need you to hear the rest. He led her to the chair across from his desk and sat in the one beside it, rather than behind the desk itself. No barrier between them. That felt deliberate. I had a DNA test arranged 3 weeks ago, he said. Before the wedding. Before any of this. Jovien looked up. 3 weeks ago? I was working up to telling you. I had a plan. A careful, considered plan that involved telling you the truth over time, in stages, in a way that would minimize the disruption to your life. He looked at his hands. And then Elliot left you at the altar, and every plan I had became irrelevant. So when you stepped in that morning, it wasn't entirely altruistic. He said it plainly, without apology. I stepped in because I couldn't stand watching you face that alone, but I also stepped in because some part of me understood that if Meadow is my daughter, then what was happening to you was happening to my family, and I protect my family. The word landed between them with significant weight. The photographs in the folder, Jovien said, remembering what he'd mentioned on Wednesday. You had me followed. For 6 weeks before I offered you the job, I needed to understand who you were, whether approaching you would be welcome or harmful. He held her gaze. Everything I found made me certain you were someone worth knowing. The job offer was genuine, your work was exceptional, but yes, proximity was also the point. Jovien absorbed this. The fact of being watched, catalogued, assessed without her knowledge should have felt like a violation. and part of her registered it as exactly that. But underneath the violation was something she couldn't dismiss. He had spent years trying to do the right thing in the wrong way. The gap between his intentions and his methods was large, but the intentions themselves were not small. "If the DNA test confirms you're her father," she said carefully, "what do you want?" He looked at her steadily. "I want to be present for Meadow, whatever form that takes, whatever pace works for her. I don't want to upend her life. I want to be in it." He paused. "And I want the chance to be honest with you, properly honest. No more careful distances and professional barriers. And if the test says you're not her father, then I step back, handle the annulment, remove myself from your life completely if that's what you need." His thumb traced her knuckles once more. "But I don't believe that's what the test will say." Yovienne looked down at their joined hands. "I arranged for the results to be ready by Sunday evening," Dominic continued. "I'd like us to open them together, whatever the answer is." She nodded slowly. "There's one more thing." His voice shifted slightly, became more careful. "Elliot's knowledge of Stanford, the anonymous call he received. I don't know who made it, but someone with access to information about that night contacted him deliberately on your wedding morning." He met her eyes. "That isn't coincidence. Someone wanted your wedding to fail. I don't know who yet, but I'm looking into it." Before Jovienne could respond, her phone rang. Natasha. She answered on instinct. "Joe." Natasha's voice was stripped of everything except urgency. "Elliot filed this morning, emergency custody petition. He's claiming fraud. He's claiming Dominic is Meadow's biological father and that you concealed it deliberately." Jovienne's blood went cold. "The hearing is Monday," Natasha continued. 9 in the morning. Monday. The DNA results would arrive Sunday evening. One night to hold the answer before walking into a courtroom where everything depended on it. Dominic watched her face as she lowered the phone. "I heard," he said quietly. "My legal team will be ready." He'd been searching for her for 6 years. He'd finally told her the truth. And now someone had beaten them both to the courtroom. Subscribe right now and hit the bell. Because what happens on Monday? Nothing either of them expected. The weekend passed in controlled urgency. Dominic's legal team occupied Jovienne's kitchen table for most of Saturday. 3 attorneys building a counter-argument to Elliot's emergency petition, working through every document, every timeline, every piece of evidence that established Jovienne as a fit and stable mother. Meadow moved through the apartment around all of it, largely unbothered, occasionally bringing attorneys her stuffed elephant to examine, and once very seriously asking if anyone wanted juice. "She's remarkable," one of the attorneys said quietly to Jovienne when Meadow had gone back to her room. "Yes," Jovienne agreed. "She is." Saturday evening, after the legal team had gone, Dominic stayed. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, where contracts and legal briefs had covered every surface an hour before. The apartment was quiet. Meadow was asleep. "Elliot's attorney is Preston Doherty," Dominic said. "He's very good. He'll try to establish a pattern of deception rather than focusing on the specific facts." "Can he win?" "Not if we're honest." He said it simply. "The truth is unusual and complicated, but it isn't disqualifying. We tell it clearly. We let the judge assess it." "And the DNA results?" "We open them together tomorrow evening. Then we walk into that courtroom Monday morning with full knowledge of whatever we're dealing with." Jovienne looked at him across the table, the man who had stepped into the worst moment of her life and refused to let her face it alone. The man who had carried a secret for 6 years out of a complicated mixture of guilt and hope, and something she still didn't entirely have a name for. "Whatever the results say," she said, "I need you to know something." He waited. "What you did at the wedding, what you've done this week, it matters to me. Not because of what it might mean for Meadow, because of what it says about who you are." Something shifted in his expression. The careful composure that he wore like a second skin showed a crack, and through it she glimpsed something genuine and quietly hopeful. "Get some sleep," he said finally. "Tomorrow is going to ask a lot of both of us." He left at 11. She locked the door behind him, checked on Meadow, and lay in the dark waiting for Sunday to arrive. Sunday evening, the DNA results arrived. They sat together at her kitchen table, the envelope between them, Meadow already asleep down the hall. Dominic's 3 attorneys had strongly recommended reviewing the results that evening in order to prepare their legal strategy accordingly. He had agreed, overriding his earlier instinct to wait until the courtroom. He opened the envelope. They read it together, side by side, leaning over the single sheet of paper that answered a 6-year question in 4 lines of clinical language. The results confirmed paternity. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the city continued its indifferent noise. Then Dominic reached across the table and covered her hand with his. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Monday morning arrived grey and cold. Yovienne stood before her bedroom mirror in her most conservative suit. Navy blue. Composed. The armor of a woman who had survived worse than this and intended to keep surviving. Meadow was staying with Natasha for the day. At the door, her daughter had wrapped both arms around Jovienne's neck and held on for an extra moment. "You're the best, Mommy," Meadow said into her shoulder. "You're the best everything," Jovienne replied. She held it together until she reached the elevator. The courthouse rose against a grey sky. Stone columns, wide steps. The architecture of institutions that wanted you to feel small before you even walked through the door. Dominic was waiting at the bottom of the steps, with his legal team arranged behind him. His suit was immaculate. His expression was composed. But when he saw her cross the street toward him, something in his face shifted into something quieter and more personal than composure. "Ready?" he asked. "No," she said honestly. "But let's go anyway." They walked up the courthouse steps side by side. The legal team followed. The heavy doors opened. Somewhere in this building, a judge was about to hear the most complicated and honest story Jovienne had ever told. She had the DNA results in her bag. She had Dominic beside her. She had the truth. She told herself that would be enough. Courtroom 4B smelled like old wood and institutional gravity. Jovienne took her seat at the respondents' table. Dominic sat beside her, his legal team spreading documents with quiet efficiency. The confirmed DNA results were in a folder in front of the lead attorney, ready to be entered as evidence at the appropriate moment. Across the aisle, Elliot sat with the careful posture of a man performing reasonableness. Fresh shave, conservative tie, the presentation of a concerned parent exercising his rights through proper legal channels. Jovienne looked at him and felt something settle in her chest. Not anger, something colder and more permanent. The recognition of a person who had shown her exactly who they were and could never take it back. His attorney, Preston Doherty, was already reviewing notes with the focused energy of a man preparing to perform. Silver hair, measured movements, the practiced ease of someone who had spent decades winning rooms before the first word was spoken. Judge Margaret Chen entered at exactly 9 o'clock, small and precise, with sharp eyes that moved across the courtroom as she settled into her chair, reading the room before she read a single document. "Be seated." Her voice carried without effort. "We're here regarding the emergency petition filed by Elliot Whitmore concerning the minor child Meadow Thorne. Mr. Doherty, you may present your client's case." Doherty rose smoothly. "Your Honor, my client seeks emergency custody consideration on the following grounds. First, Mr. Whitmore's signature on the child's birth certificate establishes his legal standing as presumed parent. Second, the child's mother entered a marriage 3 days after my client's departure under circumstances that suggest a pre-existing personal relationship with her employer, Dominic Vaughn. Third, he paused with the timing of a man who had learned exactly where to place his silences for maximum effect. We have evidence suggesting Mr. Vaughn may be the minor child's biological father, a material fact that Ms. Thorne concealed, demonstrating a pattern of deception that is directly relevant to her fitness as a custodial parent. Murmurs moved through the gallery. Dominic's hand found Jovienne's beneath the table. His thumb traced its familiar pattern across her knuckles. Steady, present. The lead attorney leaned toward Jovienne. "When the judge asks for your response, we present the DNA results immediately. We don't wait." Jovienne nodded. Judge Chen looked toward their table. "Miss Thorne, do you wish to respond to these allegations?" Before she could open her mouth, the courtroom doors opened. Every head in courtroom 4B turned. A man stood in the doorway, the same height as Dominic, the same build, dark hair, same shade, swept back from a face that was Dominic's face in every structural detail, but carried it differently. Harder around the edges, deeper lines. The face of someone who had spent time in circumstances that left marks. Yovien's eyes moved from the doorway to the man beside her. Dominic had gone completely white, not surprised, not confused. Something more fundamental than either of those things. The expression of a man seeing something he had believed to be permanently, irreversibly gone. His hand in hers had turned to stone. He was not breathing. "Your Honor." The man in the doorway spoke with a voice that was Dominic's voice, roughened by years of something different. "I apologize for this interruption. I have information that is directly relevant to these proceedings, and I am asking for 30 seconds to present it." Judge Chen's gavel struck once, sharp and final. "This is a closed hearing. You will identify yourself immediately, or I will have you removed." The man walked down the center aisle. Each step was deliberate. He moved the way Dominic moved, that same quality of absolute certainty about where the next step would land. But where Dominic's certainty had the quality of a man who built things, this man's certainty had the quality of someone who had survived things. He stopped at the bar. "My name is Sebastian Vahn." His eyes found Dominic's across the courtroom and held there. "Dominic is my twin brother." The courtroom came apart at the seams. Elliot rose halfway from his chair. Doherty turned to his client with an expression that suggested even he had not anticipated this development. The gallery erupted in noise that Judge Chen's gavel rapidly dismantled. Yovien could not move. Beside her, Dominic was still completely still. Still that particular shade of white that had nothing to do with social discomfort and everything to do with something tearing open inside him. She could feel the tremor running through his hand where it held hers. "Dominic." Her voice was barely sound. "When did you last see him?" "The night before his car went into the ravine." His voice came out hollow. 10 years ago. They found the car. They never found..." He stopped. "I buried him. In every way you can bury someone without a body." 10 years. A decade of believing his brother was dead. And here Sebastian stood, alive and present, and entirely aware of the devastation his entrance was causing. Sebastian turned from his brother to the judge. 6 years ago, I attended a technology event adjacent to Stanford University. The same night, I attended a party at the Sigma House. The power went out." His voice was level, factual. "While the lights were down, I met a woman on a balcony. We talked for hours. Her name was Jovienne Thorne. I tried to find her afterward. I failed." He paused. "I have reason to believe I may be the biological father of her daughter." The sealed DNA results sat in the folder in front of Dominic's lead attorney. Results that had been run against Dominic's DNA, not Sebastian's. And the thing about identical twins, the thing that turned those results from an answer into a question that had no clean resolution, was something everyone in that courtroom understood simultaneously. Identical twins share identical DNA. The test could not tell them apart. The DNA results folder sat on the table in front of Jovien's attorney. Confirmed paternity. Except, now confirmed, paternity meant nothing. Because the sample had been Dominic's. And Dominic and Sebastian were identical twins, genetically indistinguishable. The test had proven that Meadows' father was a Vahn twin. It could not tell them which one. Judge Chen was calling for order with increasing insistence. Doherty was on his feet objecting to Sebastian's presence on procedural grounds. The gallery was generating the kind of noise that made official proceedings feel very small and very human simultaneously. Yovien heard none of it with any clarity. She was looking at Dominic. He was staring at his brother with an expression that contained 10 years of grief and the specific devastation of discovering that grief had been unnecessary. Sebastian had let him believe it, had stood by while Dominic buried him in every way you could bury someone without a body, and had said nothing for 10 years. and had appeared now not to reconcile, not to explain, but to claim the one thing Dominic had spent 6 years quietly building his life around. "You let me think you were dead," Dominic said. His voice was very quiet, quieter than anything Jovienne had heard from him. "For 10 years. I had reasons." "You had reasons." He repeated it flatly. "And now you're here, in a courtroom, claiming—" "I'm not claiming anything that isn't true." Sebastian's voice carried its own damage, its own history of something large and unresolved. "I was on that balcony. I talked to her. I made a promise I couldn't keep. I've been looking for her for 6 years, the same as you have. You couldn't have been looking very hard. Neither could you. She was right there in your building." The two brothers faced each other across the bar of a family courtroom with 10 years and one impossible question between them. And Jovienne sat in the respondent's chair with a daughter down the hall at Natasha's apartment, a DNA result that had answered the wrong question, and no way to know which of the two identical men in this room had been standing with her in the darkness of a California night 6 years ago. The truth had just become a maze with no visible exit. Jovienne walked into that courtroom carrying the truth. She walked out carrying a question she couldn't answer. Two brothers, identical in every way that science can measure. One night in the dark 6 years ago, a daughter who deserved to know where she came from, and a woman standing at the center of a storm she never saw coming. Dominic had spent 6 years searching for her, hiring her, standing beside her, building something patient and careful out of guilt and hope, and something that had quietly become love. Sebastian had spent 10 years being dead, and had chosen this moment, this courtroom, this crisis, to come back to life. The DNA results confirmed Ivan was Meadows' father. They just couldn't say which one, and somewhere beneath all of it, an anonymous caller had started this entire chain of events on a wedding morning. Someone who knew about Stanford, someone who wanted everything to fall apart. That question doesn't get answered today. If this story has held you from the beginning, you need to be here for part 2. Hit subscribe, ring that bell, and tell me in the comments, do you believe Dominic? Or does Sebastian's arrival change everything? This is Empire of Lies, where the truth is never what it seems,